I'm delighted to welcome you all to the first of these 3 Lockdown Thursday sessions. Just as we did through the first lockdown, we are looking to make sure that we fill our lives with as much interest and activity as possible. So through these next 3 Thursdays, we'll have an hour together from 7 till 8 on a subject that is key and relevant to our time. So this evening, I'm really delighted to be welcoming Mike Katz, who's the National Movement Chair of the Jewish Labour Movement, and our own Adam Langelben, who I think is also the campaigns officer of JLM, but also has been very involved with the Labour Party over the last years and was very involved with the EHRC report. As we think together for an hour about the current state of the Labour Party, whether it's currently a safe place for Jews to be, and about the future of not just Labour politics, but politics in general for Jews in this country. So we are going to have 20 minutes or so, perhaps a little longer, of Mike and Adam just sharing their thoughts and insights over the EHRC report and what happened leading up to it and since. And then there'll be the opportunity for you to ask questions. We are already over 3 screens, which means that questions will need to be done sort of via me or through me. So unlike in April, May and June, when we asked you to send me an email, what we're going to be doing this evening is asking you to send me a message through the chat if you have a question. So what you need to do if you go into the chat is you'll have the option of sending the email either to me or to Alith Zoom 2. Send it to me, because Adam doesn't want to have the questions. All right, so if you send them to me through the chat, and then I will ask your questions on your behalf. All right. So with no further ado, just to remind you, it's been a while. So just to remind you that the best way to see this is through active speaker view. And now with no further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mike and to Adam, who are just going to share their thoughts for the next 20 minutes or so before we have the opportunity for questions. Mike, I think it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Josh, and to everyone for inviting us to talk to you about this. I think I'm right in saying, Adam will correct me, it's the kind of the first community synagogue talk we've done since the HRC published. So you are very much top of the queue. Fantastic timing, and it's good to speak about it. And I think Adam will go into it in more detail, but I think from our perspective at JLM, it's great to actually be talking to people about the HRC report that exists, that we can all read, and that we can all help make us feel very vindicated for taking the positions that we took and doing what we did, rather than having to spend a long time, it felt, over the summer and indeed before then, thinking about when the HRC report was going to come and when's it going to come and when's it going to be published, and that's all that everybody wanted to know, rather than actually slightly fixating on what it was going to say when it was published. I thought I'd spend just a little bit of time just talking giving a bit of background about JLM and also kind of the run up to the referral. Adam was so closely involved in the referral itself. He's going to take up the majority of time going through the detail of that, and then we'll kind of think a little bit about where we go from here, the political fallout of publication itself, and then over to you guys. So the Jewish Labour Movement was originally called Parley Zion, and we are a long-standing part of the Labour movement. We actually are celebrating our centenary this year, the centenary of affiliation to the Labour Party. We existed as part of an international socialist movement called Parley Zion for longer than that. We've been around since the start of the 20th century, around 1902, 1903. We've been very active with the Labour Party. 1920, Parley Zion internationally decided that they really needed to kind of get involved in British politics. They thought that the only left party really that they could see prospering was the Labour Party. So they made sure they sent this young guy called David Ben-Gurion over to help make sure that we could affiliate to Parley Zion, could affiliate to the Labour Party, and the rest, as they say, is history, and we've always had a very strong relationship with the party. I think I would say as a wider community, I would of course personally say that for me Jewish values are Labour values and Labour values are Jewish values. But it was kind of clear to us, to fast forward massively, that come 2015 and the leadership election campaign following the general election, the sort of people that were joining the party, particularly to support Jeremy Corbyn, and what was happening, what happened in the wake of Corbyn's election as leader, was a change of culture and behaviour. And obviously the membership grew massively. But it was clear to us that it wasn't just an explosion in numbers that was accounting for a change in tone and a change in behaviour. Our story here really falls into two periods. There was an initial period where we as the JLM, as the only Labour affiliate speaking for Jewish people, were trying to engage with the party and explain to them what was problematic about some of the members that were joining, what was problematic about some of the candidates that were being selected, things that had been said or done around social media or indeed in meetings. We saw things like the Royale report, Jan Royale's report into the terrible behaviour at the Oxford University Labour Club, which in sort of morphed into the Chakrabarti report, which we felt at the time may have been the start of some progress had A been taken seriously and B not been quite fatally undermined by her instantly being appointed to the joining the party and being appointed to the House of Lords and to the front bench. It continued through 2017 general election, and we realised increasingly that as much as the Corbyn project was gaining control and really kind of controlling the machinery of the party in all respects, that it was harder and harder for us to kind of really continue acting in good faith and and trying to explain what was going wrong and how they could put it right. And I think 2018 was really the turning point, because we saw the Dayenu demonstration in Parliament Square. We saw the reaction of the party and the party membership to that demonstration, and particularly actually seeing kind of things, people who did, Labour MPs who did turn out to show solidarity, and the reaction that then they had in their local CLPs and online. And it was quite clear that that really there was not going to be any sort of accommodation. They weren't really interested in what we were going to what we were going to say or what we were going to do. We had tried to influence them. We tried to work through the organs of the party. We came up to when Jenny Formby, who was kind of Jeremy Corbyn's choice for General Secretary, finally was in post. We spent I was there, I think Adam was there. We spent 3.5 hours in her office shortly after arrival, saying, this is really what you have to do. Some practical steps, kind of a long list of actions that she could quite easily take if she really wanted to kind of make things better for Jewish members in the party, and show that they were really taking the issue of anti-Semitism that was flourishing seriously. If they're really going to get a grip on it in terms of the process and in terms of the culture of the party. And it was very clear from that meeting that and the lack of active interested. And there are a few things that kind of came off the back of that, because during that summer that we had the ridiculous row over 3 months about the adoption of the IHRA definition, which ended, we all recall, Jeremy Corbyn taking his own handwritten amendment to this internationally accepted definition. That was defeated, but still the fact that it was entertained was bad enough. It was the fact that we were asked, we were told that they wanted to do our anti-Semitism training at Labour Party conference that autumn, but please, could we not do it? Could they find somebody else to deliver that training? We realised there was never going to be an accommodation with this leadership, and that we had to kind of, in a sense, seek outside redress. We'd gone as far as we could do, and it was that point in time we decided to make the referral to the Equalities Watchdog, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, because we felt we know what's going on, and what's come out, and we'll come onto this obviously, but what I thought was stressed very clearly by Keir Starmer's response to the publication of the report is that in a way, half the problem. It wasn't simply the acts of abuse and racism and harassment and victimization that was going on, but it was the denialism that was attached, because we were told that actually this wasn't actual proper racism. This was weaponization of racism. It was pushed back in our face, because we were told that actually all we wanted to do was undermine the leadership or stifle debate about foreign policy, rather than and we were using racism against us as Jews in that in that way. So it was doubly insulting. We thought, no, actually we know this is going on. We know the process isn't fit for purpose. We know there's political interference. We need to bring in an outside organisation to make the party realise, because we all joined the party because of the party of equality and tolerance, and the party that fights racism isn't a party that actually grows its own racism by virtue of the kind of the nature of the members that joined, people who hadn't previously considered the Labour Party their natural political home, at least since the time of the 1980s, if ever. They were emboldened, they were given voice, they were given permission to speak, and ultimately it was more important to Corbyn and his leadership to keep them in the party than and protect their fellow travellers, than to do what they should have done and expel racists. We realised that wasn't going to change, and that's why we made the referral. And so I'm going to shut up now and hand over to Adam, who's going to dive into the how, whys and wherefores of how that referral was put together, and go into a bit more detail about the report.
Great. Hi everyone. Hope everyone can hear me. It's interesting that Mike just touched on, he mentioned Jenny Formby, because people may remember me hovering around the shore, if you were there on a Friday night in 2018, with someone who looked remarkably like Jenny Formby, who we brought to ALIF as part of that attempt to engage people in good faith who haven't had much involvement with the Jewish community before, or even been inside a synagogue. So yeah, I thought it was interesting. I thought I should probably mention that she's actually been to ALIF as part of that. So Mike's already spoken about how there are two stages to our sort of engagement. One was us genuinely being good faith actors, us giving everyone possible the benefit of the doubt. So that meant us also opening up our minds to people who in the past we hadn't necessarily always spoken to. So Owen Jones spoke at one of our conferences a few years ago, and there was a lot of pushback from the Jewish community, but we felt at the time it was important to try and reach out, to try and engage other voices who hadn't necessarily been put in touch with the mainstream Jewish community. But by 2018, by March 2018, we realised after the incident with the mural and the demonstration in Parliament Square that we couldn't really maintain this any longer. So as Mike mentioned, we decided to make a referral collectively to the EHRC, and the first barrier for us was, I'm not sure if people know this, but the EHRC has only ever launched one other statutory Section 20 investigation before this. So that was against the Metropolitan Police in, I believe, 2015-ish, in regards to the lack of promotion of black police officers in the force. That's the only time the highest level investigation with the HRC has been launched. And for us, when we originally thought about this, we weren't necessarily sure that we'd be able to reach the threshold to trigger that high level investigation, because the threshold is really very, very high. So the process we went up through to get to the point where the report was released a few weeks ago was, in about autumn 2018, we decided, right, to put together this referral, we need to build up our evidence. We know that there's a horrible culture around the party. We know that in meetings, things really, really, really go south. An example of that, which I think is actually probably the best example, is Birkenhead constituency Labour Party, a constituent Labour Party that doesn't really have many Jews in it, used the democratic processes of the Labour Party to reject anti-Semitism training from JLM on the basis that JLM, through its belief in Zionism, are in cahoots with ISIS. And this constituency Labour group, they actually thought it was appropriate to actually put it in the minutes of the meeting. So there's published minutes of the meeting alleging JLM's involvement or association with the Islamic State. And I think that speaks to sort of the toxic culture that existed at the time, and that has existed in various places where there are no Jews, but for whatever reason, Jews are the only topic of conversation, and Jews are seen through the prism of being the enemy. So we knew there's a problem, but we had to demonstrate it. So in autumn 2018, we launched what we called at the time the Anti-Semitism Monitoring Centre, where we invited any Jewish Labour Party member or non-Jewish to submit their testimony of what they had seen inside a physical Labour Party meeting. So we weren't that interested at the time in social media. There are a lot of people who are monitoring social media, but we felt it was really important to demonstrate what was going on inside of the party in local meetings in order to build up this case. So we were expecting, we weren't quite sure what to expect, but within 2 weeks, we had 800 very detailed submissions coming to us, ranging from a young Jewish man in South London who was physically assaulted because he raised the issue of anti-Semitism in a meeting, to another young mum also in South London who had raised the issue of anti-Semitism after people might remember Pete Wilsman made a comment about rabbis who signed the joint letter to adopt the IRA definition, and he referred to them as Jewish Trump fanatics. Now that's got this gentleman suspended. I actually think Rabbi Josh was one of the Jewish Trump fanatics he was referring to, which of course is not, but that generated a whole series of new incidents in the Labour Party. But this young mum who had raised the issue or had tried to sort of argue back against people who were pushing this analogy about Jews being Trump fanatics in her local meeting, 24 hours later, she woke up and in her front garden, someone had found out where she lived and left a big poster of Donald Trump on her garden for her children to find in the morning. Now that's, for us, it's clear anti-Semitic harassment and motive there. So those are two examples, but we had 800 different cases which came through to us. So we then spent some time going through them all, and with some amazing help from the lawyers at Mishkon D'Raya who have been helping us throughout this process and have literally been the most amazing law firm you could possibly ask for to turn this into a submission. We also had one other crucial person who came forward to us, and that's a young man called Joshua Simon, who you probably have never heard of, but he is now public. Joshua Simon was the first whistleblower who came forward to us. He was a young Jewish man who worked in Jeremy Corbyn's office. He wanted to go and work for Jeremy Corbyn because he bought into the idea of Jeremy proposed in 2015 about changing the world, making it a better place, and how better to do that than to go and work for the leader of the opposition. But very quickly, the moment that his colleagues found out he was Jewish, all of a sudden he was no longer a valued member of the team. He was no longer in the inner circle of their decision making. As and when there were issues with the Jewish community, he was asked to translate for the Jewish community, but his advice was never heeded or taken. And he tells one story which he has published before, actually, which is he was asked to write the Pesach message for Jeremy Corbyn by Seamus Milne, and he wrote it in Hebrew, and he basically read it out to the office. And Seamus Milne turns around and says, "Oh, I don't want it. It sounds too Zionist." When actually it was just Hebrew written to try and reach the Jewish community. And that kind of, again, speaks to sort of the mind frame and culture of some of the people who are at the very top. But so he was our first whistleblower, and he was really, really important because he helped us demonstrate that this thing went right to the top. Now, we put in our first submission to the EHRC in autumn 2018. We hadn't heard anything for months. But whilst we were waiting, we also had been put in touch with, or we'd reached out to another 30 or so whistleblowers, people who either were still in the party, who had reached out to us saying, we know that there's wrongdoing and we really need to find a mechanism to do the right thing, or people who'd already left the party and had felt immense guilt about things that they had witnessed, things that perhaps they had not done in response to things. So by the time we reached, I think it was March 2019, we had 35 more whistleblowers who used to work, or who did or previously worked for the Labour Party, who were working with, who brought with them very, very detailed statements and also, crucially, documentation, which the EHRC would need. and were sent into the HRC to help them make their examination of the Labour Party. So we got to autumn 2019, and that's when the HRC formally announced their investigation. They formally announced they had the evidence threshold had been reached, and they were launching their Section 20 investigation, which for us was a huge deal. But all of a sudden, the part of the reasoning for the HRC launching it was they'd made inquiries to the Labour Party prior to this announcement. The Labour Party were refusing to cooperate. And that was very much one of the reasons why the HRC felt they had to go and take this next step. And that's, if you've read the report, it comes throughout the report that at various points the Labour Party were very, very uncooperative in replying to quite simple requests the HRC made. And then there was sort of another crucial moment for us, and that was when BBC Panorama aired, because 10 of the 35 whistleblowers who we'd been working with had appeared on Panorama. Very brave, amazing people who didn't have to do this. Like, they're non-Jewish people who didn't have to go and put their neck out for us, and they decided that they were going to, and they felt they owed it to us, and they felt very guilty about things they had seen and witnessed whilst they were working for the party. But Panorama triggered a further 35 members of staff to come forward, including people inside Jeremy Corbyn's office as late as 2019. So Panorama was a huge moment because it meant that the people who appeared in Panorama inspired other people to come forward to go and do the right thing. And it's our view that the whistleblowers, alongside the testimony provided of Jewish Labour Party members, is how we got to the point where we had this successful outcome from the HRC, where the HRC had made the finding that the Labour Party had acted unlawfully, which was different to the investigation to the Met. The investigation to the Met that happened a few years ago, they found severe failings in what the Met had done, but they hadn't felt they had to issue an unlawful act notice. This is the first time in the HRC's history that they've actually issued an unlawful act notice to any organisation, let alone the Labour Party. And I guess, sort of, for me and Mike and for everyone else, it kind of speaks to our absolute sadness. It's not really a feeling of vindication. It's an absolute sadness. We and other people joined the Labour Party because we want to make the world a better place. We're anti-racist to our core. We believe in equality and human rights. And unfortunately, we ended up having to be the people who had to trigger the investigation into the Labour Party, which eventually found them guilty of failing in all these things. It's not our fault that it happened. Ultimately, it's the Labour Party's fault for allowing it to happen. But it's not lost on us how depressing, I guess, that is. So fast forward to a few weeks ago, we had the report. We hadn't seen a copy of the report, by the way, but the Labour Party had received a draft copy of the report. And I guess, sort of, the only indication we had of what was in the report was early this year, the Labour Party chose to. Sorry, I should fast forward back again. Or sorry, go backwards a little bit. After Panorama aired, the whistleblowers were libelled by the Labour Party, as people might know. And the whistleblowers decided to pursue legal action against the Labour Party. And Keir Starmer, earlier this year, settled with the whistleblowers. Now, by the time Keir Starmer decided to settle with the whistleblowers, he was already in possession, and the Labour Party corporately were already in possession of the draft EHRC report. So it meant that the whistleblowers' version of events was vindicated within the EHRC report, and the Labour Party knew that, which is why they decided to settle. Not only because they're former staff and it's the right thing to do, but also the EHRC report completely vindicates what these staffers told BBC Panorama. So we had the report. So we hadn't seen it. Our lawyers had it 1 hour before us, so they were reading through it to sort of let us know the verdict at 10 o'clock on the dot. And really, from the moment, sort of, we were hoping for a. We were ecstatic that we had the result that we had, but we were hoping for a period of reflection. We were hoping for sort of a period of time whereby the Labour left and other actors who in part were responsible may reflect on what had happened before and think about how to repair relationships, how to move forward, how to properly address anti-Semitism of the Labour Party, but also crucially, and this is the cause of the whole Labour Party's issues with this, is to police the boundaries of the Labour Party. And really, Mike touched on this, but the Labour Party never had an anti-Semitism problem because it very forcefully policed its left flank in the same way that Conservatives should police their right flank, to make sure that people who hold views that are well outside of the mainstream would never feel welcome in the Labour Party. And that policy used to exist before Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, and that policy ceased to exist, which is why these people came into the party. But we were hoping for a period of reflection. We didn't get that. Jeremy Corbyn decided to ruin it within 3 hours, and of course he made it all about himself, which is a great shame. But we're hoping, sort of, now that we're a few weeks on, we can sort of both talk to the Jewish community about a period of reflection for us, because I think the community have gone through a sort of a semi-5-year trauma alongside Jewish Labour Party members, but also talking to the Labour Party about actually how the Labour Party need to make amends for this. So I think I've spoken for 10 minutes, so I think that's probably it for me. But I'll pass back to Josh. That's Mark's got to
add. So I would like to invite anyone, if you'd like to contribute a question, you can do that through the chat. You just go to chat at the bottom of your screen, and then if you just make sure it's coming to me, then please do contribute a question. So thank you for that sort of summary of how we got to where we are now. Where do you think we are now? I mean, so kind of like looking forwards, where are we now? What's partly in terms of kind of what have you heard through the Labour Party? How do you feel the response has been? But also, what do you think the future looks like in terms of how the party moves forward? Because the constituent, like the members of the party, are the same people, or a lot of them are the same people, and clearly there is it's a cliched phrase at the moment, but a battle for the soul of the party that is still ongoing. So, Mike, do you want to just say a little bit more about kind of where you think you are and what happens now?
Well, yeah, it's a really good observation, Rabbi Josh. Some of the, there have actually been people flouncing out of the party. Good riddance to them. It became, I mean, I'll put it this way: when we were, firstly, when Keir Starmer was elected, it was in the middle of, it was in early April, early into lockdown. He could have, just said, "This is an important issue to me," but everybody's just focused on fighting COVID. But nonetheless, pretty much the first words out of his mouth were an apology to the community, and he's obviously taken action. So we thought, there is something that we can build on, even before we got a sniff that the commission was going to be reporting, or indeed indications of what that would be. Now, it always seemed to me that there would be a day coming when, in the wake of the report finding what we wanted it to find, where there would be basically two sorts of Labour Party members: those who accepted the legitimacy of the HRC and its recommendations, didn't think it was some Tory front organisation that was just put up, and that accepted the Labour Party's reaction to it, which was that, gone through 5 years of shame, and we need to do whatever we can do to rebuild our processes, put an independent system in, but also, more importantly, tackle the toxic culture. There were those kind of Labour Party members who agreed with where the leadership was going, and there were those that didn't. And frankly, those that didn't, there's the door. And that, I think, Adam is absolutely right. We wanted to spend time on the day of publication saying, these are the stories of how people were affected by this shameful period of Labour Party history. This is how they suffered. So let's work out what went wrong, and let's have some healing. Let's have a time for reflection. Jeremy Corbyn meant that wasn't going to happen. But the only plus side of that, there's that phrase, best word done quickly. And actually, perhaps we are having that battle for the soul of the party right now. And we're seeing people decide, the General Secretary of the party has been very strong in telling local parties they can't have motions discussing the HRC report, and they can't have motions discussing individual disciplinary cases, and they can't have motions saying Jeremy Corbyn should be reinstated. That's not competent business for them. Some are passing them anyway. Some people are wanting to sign petitions anyway. There is maybe this fight is coming. So where are we? I think, in a sense, we're right in the trenches on it still, but at least we know that we are not just by ourselves as the Jewish Labour movement, as Jewish Labour members, and with our allies, and indeed as a whole community, fighting a party of government that doesn't want to admit it's got a problem, let alone do anything about it. We know now the leadership are at least on its side and on our side, and they won't, we hope they won't tolerate the worst offenders, and we know they understand the need to correct culture, which is ultimately around education, awareness raising, and training, which is another part of the another part of the puzzle. And I think, from a member's point of view, I think that's where we are. I don't know what you think, Adam.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think actually tomorrow will be a major story in that tomorrow is the result. So over the summer, the Labour Party have been running the election for their national executive, and the results are coming out tomorrow. And I think that would be quite telling in terms of knowing where members are at on this issue, but also in terms of the direction of the party. Because I think the one thing Jeremy Corbyn was right about first time as Labour leader was the centre of power was no longer really with him in the same way as it perhaps was with other previous leaders. It was very much with the membership. And therefore, the only way you can possibly change the culture of the Labour Party to a certain extent is going to have to be to either get new members or change the culture inside of the party. And I think tomorrow will be the first major test, because it'll be the first time there'll be a ballot that we've seen of Labour Party members since Keir Starmer was elected by those members. I'm not a member of the Labour Party anymore, so it's therefore I'm not necessarily seeing what's going on inside of local parties. But I do say that I am optimistic in the way that I wasn't 6 months ago. I'm very optimistic. I'm very hopeful. I see people who in the past hadn't been particularly thoughtful in how they looked at these issues, who now are appearing to be a lot more thoughtful.
So I'm going to pick up on the your observation that you're not a member of the party anymore in a moment. But before we do that, you've spoken, both of you, about Keir Starmer as an ally. I think what many people are struggling with still is the fact that however strong an ally he is now, he remained in leadership while this was all going on. He remained in the shadow cabinet. We had Luciana Berger come and speak at ALIF and share just a tiny fraction of the experience that she had. Adam, I've heard a tiny fraction of the experience that you've had. He remained in leadership. He remained in the shadow cabinet through this. When you ask him about, and I know that he's coming to the JLM conference towards the end of the month, or giving a speech at JLM conference. Do you feel? I mean, he's a politician. But do you feel kind of satisfied with his responses to his personal conduct during this? Mike, I suppose we should start with you.
I think that's a tricky one to answer, because throughout all of this, I think we've all had our own levels of personal responsibility and personal agency in this. And I think, if you look at Adam and I, we've had different responses. And the one thing we're very clear in JLM amongst our membership is that, just to explain and be clear about, is to be a member of JLM, you've got to qualify to be a Labour Party member, i.e. not be a member of any other party, but you don't have to be a Labour Party member. And many, many people kind of either retained membership of JLM whilst they left the party, or indeed joined JLM because they left the party in disgust at anti-Semitism. And everybody has their red line. And for instance, I was involved in giving evidence to the Jackie Walker's disciplinary panel, and I think in retrospect, I realised that had, on the basis of what I knew and the evidence that I was giving and I'd seen, that if she hadn't been expelled from the Labour Party when that happened, then that might well have been my red line for membership. But we all had we all respected each other's lines, that the personal lines that we had to cross. And I think it's up to ultimately it's up to Keir to explain what he did, what he didn't do, what he could have done more. I hope we hear more from him on that. I think we might have even heard more from him actually on the day of publication, had it not been overtaken by events and the General Secretary having to step in and suspend Corbyn, and obviously that wrapped up. But I think there are, in a sense, the spotlight's on him because he's the leader, but there are many good, fine Labour Party MPs and other senior politicians who, whilst they spoke out from time to time, still treated it as politics as usual. And we all have to account for ourselves. And I think from that perspective that, you know, it could be other people that you're asking that question of. When we decided in ahead of the general election that we were going to basically go on strike and not campaign, apart from in a couple of constituencies. When we sat down and thought about it, there were really very few constituencies where we thought, actually, you know, that person has been such a strong ally that we go there and we support them, because such was the strength, the feeling of our membership, having a few months earlier passed a motion of no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn. And that was actually, in many ways, for me, as still a member, the most difficult period, because you're there to win elections, you're there to go out campaigning. It's a general election, it's the big one. And not doing that and being outside that and having to explain to people why you weren't campaigning and why you weren't supporting this excellent Labour candidate or this excellent Labour, you know, group of people, your local friends, your comrades, that was really, really difficult.
I think the key thing, so JLM didn't nominate Keir Starmer. And I think there's probably, so when JLM had their chance to nominate a candidate for leader of the Labour Party, JLM, by a decent margin, not an overwhelming margin, decided to go for Lisa Nandy as opposed to Keir Starmer, who came second. I've had a lot of time to think about this because I left the party. I've just sort of been in an anger sort of mode around everything to the Labour Party for a few years now, and I'm one of those people who left with Luciana. I helped Luciana after she left the Labour Party. I think there were no good choices for anyone. Having a bit of distance, like we know what happened to Luciana and the independent group and Change UK. That being said, what they did, without a doubt, played a role in getting us to where we are today. Like, almost certain that all these things sort of played into one another, but there really were no good choices for anyone. There were no good choices for the moderates who decided they wanted to work inside the Labour Party, because you could see them on TV looking to the camera and you could see in their eyes they really sort of wanted to kill themselves or don't want to be there. You could tell that every single time there was a major announcement, these people had to stand behind Jeremy Corbyn. There was anywhere else they'd rather be, but in their heads they were thinking, greater good, Labour Party's going to win an election, and you know what, we can try and rebuild. And you know what? In the grand scheme of different options, they were proved right and I was proved wrong. And that's kind of how I'm trying to look at it, to try and find a positive here. I think Keir's going to have to at some point address a Jewish community audience, and he's going to have to answer that question. It may well be at the JLM conference, it may well be at other things. Perhaps he may come and speak at Aleph to answer himself, but without doubt he won't be able to avoid answering that question, because wherever he goes, he's going to get asked over and over again.
Mm-hmm. You know, and if I could just add on the back of that, Adam's got it spot on. There are no good choices. And I stood as a parliamentary candidate in next door seat to where Aleph is in Hendon, you know, second most Jewish seat in the country, you know, in 2017. And at the time, not inaccurately, there were plenty of people saying, I'm normally a Labour Party voter, but I can't vote for this direct. I can't vote for this. And I was of the view, well, you know, I don't think, you know, as everybody was, the chance of Labour forming government on the basis of polls are fairly small. I think I can be a better MP from the area than the incumbent. And actually, I've shared the values of a lot of people, Jews and non-Jews, alike in the constituency. And I want to try and solve things from inside. And ultimately, all of us who stayed inside the party, even those like, you know, the chair of the movement that says we're not campaigning in the general election because we think Jeremy Corbyn, we have no confidence in Jeremy Corbyn, we were still inside the party. And there was always a good volume of people outside the community, outside us in the community, I should say, sorry, that was saying, you know, what are you doing? This is complicity by you staying in, you know, and I would always say, you know, if I leave, they force me out and I can't do anything to change it. But who's right? Who's wrong? No good choices. Certainly not for the electorate in this election, I'd say.
So, Adam, I mean, do you want to just say a little bit about what pushed you out? Because I think, you know, essentially you and Mike took very different approaches. And whilst you've both stayed, or you stayed involved with JLM, you've stepped out from the Labour Party. You obviously didn't feel able to remain in the way that Mike has. So, and really did kind of have to make that, or felt you had to make that incredibly difficult move. So do you want to say just a little bit about what it was that pushed you. What was your red line, I suppose?
I think so. On reflection, I think it was sort of, there was no single thing. It was a build-up, and actually, so whilst I was a councillor, and I've now had some time to think about this and reflect on it. I was a councillor from 2014 to 2018 in West Hendon, London Borough of Barnet. And thinking about it now, I think for my last 2 years as being a councillor, I was not a very good councillor. And I say this because my mind was completely preoccupied with dealing with anti-Semitism in my own party, and that actually makes me very upset. And I ended up losing that election in 2018, and I think the anger inside me built up that I was having to spend all this time dealing with racism in the place I call my political home. So there's an added layer of complexity in the fact that West Hendon was one of the few areas that Labour held in North London that did have a very, very sizable Jewish population, and it had been a Labour-held area for a very long time. In fact, it'd been Labour for 45 years up until we lost it in 2018. So it kind of it brought home to me the level of anger inside the Jewish community, because I know that the areas where Labour lost in that election were very much amongst Jewish Labour voters, and people decided to march to their feet. But after that, I started speaking out more. I became a bit more robust in how I approach these things inside the party. And whenever I was going to Labour Party meetings, it felt like it was going to be an uphill battle and a culture of denial. And whenever I was going to be trying to raise something in good faith, I would be pushed back on by people who are trying to either claim I'm making it up, who in the process of doing so would then accuse me of something anti-Semitic themselves. And everything just became a battle where actually it got to a point where I really didn't think sort of I could really cope with it anymore. It was too much of a mental turmoil. And then Luciana decided to leave the Labour Party, and like I'm a social democrat and I believe in solidarity. And when someone walks and makes a big statement like that, I don't think they should be made to walk alone. And it was very much my view that if people decided to leave the Labour Party en masse or in a small group, then it wouldn't just be MPs who are necessary to walk with them. It's actually other people would have to walk with them and help them and hold their hands in support. So that's what I did, I think. But for me, it was a build-up of a variety of different things over a number of years that I just didn't need it in my life anymore. At the same time, also my wife was pregnant, and I decided when I have a baby, you know what, it's probably best I'm out of this thing.
So I think you kind of know what the next question is, because it's the question that lots of people are asking me, which is, having made the decision to leave, when and what are the criteria on which you might make the decision to rejoin? And I think kind of, I'd love us to just move on to the current state of the party and where you feel it's at. You speak about a culture of denial, Adam. I think many of us are still struck by, even in the face of an EHRC report, which is, theoretically as objective as it's possible for it to be, an organisation set up by the Labour Party in order to investigate inequality that finds the Labour Party itself guilty of unlawful harassment, but through acts of its agents. Despite all that, you still have, a culture of denial in the party. The continuing voice that says it's a very small minority in the party, the campaigning on behalf of Corbyn since his suspension. A number of people on the side of my screen have name-checked Len McCluskey as personally problematic. Where is the party now? Because it doesn't feel like that bit of the party is going away.
Yeah. So in terms of, am I going to rejoin, which is the first question. I want to wait and see what the Labour Party put in their action plan. So the Labour Party legally have to respond to the EHRC by the 10th of December. And they have to say, this is what we're going to do to try and repair these issues and to implement your recommendations and go further. So I want to see what they say in response. I also want to see progress on that change of culture. I think in terms of the wider question, Len McCluskey is a bully. I have the very, very unfortunate pleasure of having sat with him for 3.5 hours talking about anti-Semitism once, trying to explain to him what the issue was, and he's a bully, and bluntly, he's not someone very bright. So he really is like a bull in the china shop on everything. But thankfully, he's actually retiring next year, so he won't be there for a huge amount longer. But equally, I think he's in a bit of a rock and a hard place, because actually, for all of his bluster and talk right now and his huffing and puffing, his trade union, Unite, need the Labour Party far more than the Labour Party need them. To be blunt, they're going to have to get with the programme, and Unite are going to have to decide if they want to be the place that harbours these anti-Semites going forwards, because a lot of the people who are leaving the Labour Party seem to be running towards Unite. In terms of the wider culture, I think things are changing. Like I wasn't expecting Keir Starmer to be as swift and as firm on this, and I have to say I am surprised positively. I was not expecting this. So in terms of how I feel the overall direction is moving, I have to say it's positive. I didn't expect him to be so swift. I didn't expect him to be so strong, and I am impressed.
Mike, what's your sense of the culture and where we are now?
I think Adam's right. I think everybody has been pleasantly surprised by Keir's willingness not just to say the right things, and actually say them in a convincing voice, because nobody was convinced by Jeremy Corbyn's protestations by the end of it, or indeed, quite early on when he couldn't find his fight, he couldn't say the word anti-Semitism without, adding and every other form of racism and discrimination. But I think before EHRC even sent a draft report through, he took very swift action when Rebecca Long-Bailey shared some nasty piece of anti-Semitism on social media, and kind of showed that you had to he was really prepared to take a political hit in doing so. So I think I have my own private theory here that I think one thing we know about Keir Starmer is that he's a lawyer, and that for him the law is absolutely it's been his guiding light. And I think the idea there is on the left the idea that maybe this is actually a problem in wider politics, in the way that we kind of consume information and kind of turn it into memes and themes without really considering it. That the AHRC isn't, as Keir treats it, as we treat it, as right-thing people treat it, as kind of as objective as you could find, finding of facts, finding a legal objective opinion, and it is the Labour Party broke the law. That's a fact. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. But there are some people still on the left who want to say, well, hold on a second, we've got this. But actually, if you looked at that leaked report that came out soon, which people may be have heard of, a leaked report kind of wanting to rewrite history and basically say that things were getting a lot better under Jenny Formby than they were under the previous General Secretary. And actually, a lot of this was complaints about nothing. That was leaked, and a massive data breach in leaking as it happens as well. There are a lot of people on the left who want to say, well, actually, this is our gospel. This is what we think is emis. This is the what we want to believe. And they're trying to play one off against the other, and you can't have that, because from a Starmer point of view, worldview, the HRC is fact, and the HRC is has absolute competency, legitimacy, and locus to make the findings of fact, and find that the party behaved illegally and discriminated against Jewish members, and that has to be and that's kind of an absolute rock bottom line for him. So I kind of so for me that I think is a way to have some faith in going forward, that we will get it right, both in terms of process but also in terms of turning the culture around. He wants like any politician, he wants to be prime minister. And I think he understands that, I always say the good thing, people in Barnet understood the issue of racism, and there's good polling evidence that there are lots of non-Jewish areas that people, people didn't like the sound of anti-Semitism, even if they weren't Jews and didn't know any Jews, anything like that. But at the same time, there's also a wider feeling, which spoke to other things about Corbyn, is that sadly he was no leader. And if he, whatever you think about anti-Semitism, if the people are still going on about it 4 years on, and you can't just put a problem to bed, especially a problem about racism for the Labour Party, then what hope have you got of sorting the country's problems? And I think Keir understands that he has to be, just 110% on this. And we shall see. We shall see what comes out, because Adam's absolutely right. The next stage of this statutory improvement plan, what's going to come out of that? What the Labour Party wants to do with training and education, what the Labour Party wants to do in terms of an independent disciplinary system, and how the Labour Party is going to get back into kind of creating a culture that doesn't tolerate intolerance, that does allow debate and freedom. It doesn't make people basically or Jewish think, I'm not going to participate, go along to my GC, my monthly general meeting, because I don't want to be shouted at. I've got better things to do in my life. That we shall see. But I think we're in a much better direction than we were, how far ago is April, when Keir was elected.
But potentially he's facing a quite substantial disconnect between him and a large number of people who came into the party under Corbyn. Many of whom I imagine are kind of younger, more active, certainly more active on social media, which we know is a particular problem area for the Labour Party in terms of its approach to anti-Semitism. So what is he going to have to, beyond kind of good words from the top, what's it actually going to take in terms of transformation of the party and the way in which it approaches its own membership?
I think just quickly, just to sort of correct one thing, which is, I think this idea that sort of Corbyn supporters were, the problematic Corbyn supporters were young, idealistic people who joined the Labour Party, are the ones who are responsible. Actually, is not borne out by any evidence that we've seen. Without a doubt, the people who have been guilty of pursuing hardcore anti-Semitism inside the Labour Party spaces happens to be older, white people from radical socialist political backgrounds. Who hadn't been in the Labour Party for a good 20 or 30 years. And I think the interesting fact about the Keir Starmer's election was about half of all people who voted for Jeremy Corbyn to become leader of the Labour Party voted for Keir Starmer. So I think that probably speaks to actually most of those young people who kind of could see that after an election loss of that size, they had to change. And the remainder were, broadly speaking, either union votes or people who are from those old Trotskyist backgrounds. So actually, I don't think he'll have that much problem. I think the problem is social media means that you hear lots of loud voices and lots of shouting and screaming, but actually we're not. I think tomorrow will be a really good indicator when the National Executive Committee results come out to see where the membership's at on these things.
Mm. And ultimately, it's that which controls the party. It's that shapes the tone of the party, and it's that kind of decides whether it's going to tolerate people passing motions saying, Jeremy Corbyn's an absolute hero, not an anti-racist cell in his body, or they're not. I think that's and we shall see. But I think it's I think there's an analysis that says there were kind of two types of new Labour Party member that joined after 2015. There are Leninists, who were very much that retread from the 1980s, far radical, never would have joined the Labour Party, as far too kind of centrist and sellout under any other leader apart from Jeremy Corbyn, and realised they had their chance at kind of getting the power they wanted to have and control the Labour Party with Corbyn. And then the Lenonists, the young, maybe not all young, but kind of that young, kind of the young John Lennon kind of imagine everybody was wonderful, who were inspired by Corbyn as a somebody who was saying something a bit different, and were I wanted people who want to change the world. And I think there's basically a lumpen kind of, I don't say lumpen. There's a the majority of Labour Party members are fairly decent people who want the same things that most Labour Party members want, which is kind of focus on what's happening in this country: a strong economy, strong public services, social justice, equality, support for human rights, all that jazz. And then and ultimately you don't have to do as much work in terms of numbers to get rid of the people who are the bad influences, and to work through the people, as Adam said, a lot of them were supporting Corbyn then Keir. because they were just kind of following them. I don't mean this in derogatory, but they're kind of following the mood music and kind of taking some general themes and thinking that that's the kind of Labour Party I want.
And can you envisage a time when it's all right to be openly Zionist in the Labour Party again? Because I think there's one thing about kind of how do we address anti-Semitism, and the Leninists will eventually leave and go and form their own other party or go back to selling socialist worker, and the Leninists might stay. But fundamentally, there's an issue about whether or not it's compatible with either of those groups to be openly a Zionist at a time when actually, for whatever reason, I've never really kind of understood it. Israel-Palestine plays a disproportionate role in actually the identity politics of both of those groups.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I think it's complex, because I think sort of myself, Mike, the Jewish Labour Movement are a proudly Zionist organisation. Like, we show up to Labour Party meetings as delegates, and we it says on our label who we are. You go to the website, it says that we're a socialist Zionist organisation. And therefore we do stand proud. And in the last 5 years, it's been standing proud against some quite extreme hostility. But nonetheless, we've still stood proud. I think there's a problem in how people understand the term Zionist in the left. I think that when we talk about Zionism in Jewish community spaces, we broadly speaking, even if people come from the left or the right, we understand that as the basic premise of Jewish national self-determination. That's basically the one thing that unites all different strands of the Jewish community on Israel, which is we believe in Zionism in that, using that sort of template. But the Labour Party, people don't understand it in that way. And actually, it's not really a challenge for the Labour Party to really fix that. It's a challenge for actually the Jewish community and society to think about how we talk about Zionism, how we articulate it, and also crucially to make sure that no single one strand of Zionism feels like they dominate it. So I think part of the change in feeling on the left is, and in the Labour Party, has been a feeling that the term Zionist has more and more become owned by the Israeli right. And I guess the problem there is that the British Labour Party is never going to agree with the Israeli right, especially when the Israeli right are considerably more to the right than our Conservative Party. So I think it's complex, and I'm not sure there is an easy answer other than simply answering the actual question itself, which is, can you sound proud as a Zionist in the Labour Party? I think we do, and a lot of people do on a day-to-day basis. I wouldn't say that should be something to make you fear coming back into the party.
We used the JLM hustings that Adam referred to earlier on to basically out all four leadership candidates as they were there at that point in time in the contest as Zionists, in that they supported Jewish national self-determination. And I think there's a lot to what Adam says. You have to meet in the middle. There's more that the Labour Party can do to kind of make that not such a shock statement, because it isn't necessarily equated with support for kind of the worst successes of the Israeli right as we would see it as left wingers. But and at the same time, the community has to kind of do a better job of explaining the multiplicity, I think, of Zionism and how it is different from necessarily all that goes on in Israel on a day-to-day basis. And there's work for both to do, but it's a job for education in wider society, I think, because you're absolutely right. Compared with what else goes on in the world is not unimportant, but it's there are many other things that we should be concerned about, as hopefully we still want to be international actors and part of international solidarity.
I mean, so it's interesting. Both of you have given an answer which implies that actually it's about what happens on the ground in Israel-Palestine, as opposed to a kind of symbolic meaning that this particular conflict has come to have as representing, Western colonialism or Western imperial. I mean, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's almost the sense that actually this is persuadable, which on one level is quite reassuring, but also feels like quite a task to do in terms of how we respond.
It's a mirror of what goes on. CST's figures show that when there's a spike in Israeli-Palestinian conflict, intifada, then there's a spike in anti-Semitism, and that's across society, not just the Labour Party. And so there is that idea that kind of actually, what happens on the ground there does have a direct play across, and it shouldn't do, but it does. And so that's a complicated relationship we all have to understand and explain.
I think just to add to that, there's also, I'm not sure who on the left sort of talks about Zionism in the way described. So really only Jeremy Corbyn and people of his more hard left variety of politics really occupy that space. So I'm just thinking back to columns written by Owen Jones, who sort of is the mainstream centre-left, or he likes to consider himself the centre-left journalist or commentator. Actually, when he writes on Israel Palestine, he explains it in a very nuanced way around Zionism and around what that means to Jewish people. Sort of taking these, he writes about it in really rich way. So I'm not sure actually. I think the Jewish community tend to overamp this a little bit to a certain extent. Like, there is a problem, without a doubt. Like, there's a problem in discourse around Zionism, but actually, it hasn't yet. It's not really in the mainstream.
Okay. We are coming to the end of our time. We always do a tight hour on these. Mike, do you just want to say a little bit about the kind of future of the Jewish labour movement, just sort of where you see this, as you say, more than a 100-year-old organisation, but 100 years old in terms of its affiliation to the Labour Party. Like, what's next for JLM in terms of how you see it moving forwards?
Well, it's an interesting question, and then we sometimes joke to each other that we want to, go back to being a boring old socialist society that kind of a few of us around a table in a pub somewhere talking, putting the world to rights. That's not what we want, in the sense that we think that there is always going to be strains of hard left anti-Semitism on the fringes of the movement, even if it's well driven out of the party. And that may be residing in trade unions, whether they're affiliated to the Labour Party or they're not. It may be on campus, and I think we have a role to play in being being sentinels on that. And I think there's also equally a role to play, sort of touching on it in the previous conversation answer around being a bridge between the Labour Party and the Jewish community. And once the community feels that actually the Labour Party is going in the right direction, and the leadership is as good as their word, Keir is as good as his word, and David Evans has kind of acted as an independent general secretary in doing the right thing, that actually maybe we can help through dialogue like this, but be better interlocutors between the two parties and be the bridge and actually rebuild communications. We're not, the Jewish community has never been monolithic, certainly not in recent times in terms of its voting pattern. But it's a crying shame for so many people, especially going around canvassing in 2018 in those elections that Adam was talking about. You knock on so many Jewish doors in Barnet. You saw them and this old person would come out, and you both end up in tears in the conversation, because you realise you were apologising for coming to your door, asking them if they might vote Labour, and they were almost saying, well, I've always been Labour and I just can't do it this time, because however good the local councils are, however good the local Labour group is, I can't give Jeremy Corbyn a hechsher for the way that he's behaved. And we have to get past that, and that's going to nobody, I think, is kidding themselves. That's going to be at all easy. And so there's a role in that, and there's a role obviously for us to carry on doing what we're doing, which is in essence spending our members' money, going around the country to CLPs, whether it's virtually or in person, explaining to Labour Party members how not to be racist, which is, or we now know that we've got the party behind us in that effort, and they might well help support that to make sure that it's done properly at all levels. So I think there's a lot of activity ahead, and we do need a period of reflection and kind of understanding quite what's happened and how it happened, so we can make sure it doesn't happen again. Before I shut up, I just do want to say, because I don't think I've properly said it, I just want to put on record personally, but also I think corporately on behalf of JLM, just a huge amount of thanks to Adam for the work that he did, particularly on the HRC referral, and also to somebody who's not here, but I think is well known to ALIF, Peter Mason, who's our National Secretary, who between them, they took the burden, preceding my time as chair, the burden of seeing the HRC through. And that wasn't just a lot of work, but it's a lot of kind of mental anguish in having to read all the testimony they read and reliving the suffering that the individuals, hundreds of individuals went through. And I'd also like to say, yes, again, James Libson and his team at Mishcons were absolutely amazing, and we couldn't have hoped for better. And they've been unfailingly generous in their time and their kind of their intellectual rigor they brought to the exercise. And the whistleblowers, all the whistleblowers, everybody who came forward, so many of them not Jewish, but they knew bad behaviour. They knew what was wrong. They knew what was against their Labour values, whether they were working for the party or activists, and they knew they speak out against it, even though there was often it was their own personal cost, certainly not to their benefit. You know, they kind of talk about righteous amongst nations, and they are amongst them, because, you know, they really did a good thing. We should never be in the position again where we are presenting the country such a poor choice, where so many people I knew felt there was no good choice in the general election. Who was going to lead the country? You know, we were putting too many people in this country, too many people in the Jewish community, in an absolutely invidious place at the last election. That should never happen again, because you should choose what party you want to vote for because you think they've got a good policy on tax or the NHS or whatever, not because you think can't vote for them, they're racist.
It's a pretty good place to end. Mike, thank you so much for Adam. Thank you so much for everything you do, actually, for the inspiration that you are to many of us as well. Thank you to both of you for sharing your thoughts and your experiences. Thank you to all of you for being with us. We're going to do this again next week. Next week, we are delighted to be welcoming from Israel a not dissimilar organization in some ways. So we're going to have representatives of ACRI, which is the Association of Civil Rights in Israel, are going to be with us. I think one of the things that COVID has done for all of us is kind of take our eye off some of the stuff that's been happening in Israel. And ACRI have had a huge amount to do in protecting civil rights in Israel over the course of the last few months, and also do some amazing work beyond as well. So we're going to have the executive director of ACRI and a couple of their staff joining us at 7 o'clock tomorrow evening, not tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock next Thursday evening. And then the Thursday after, we're going to be looking at something very different, another aspect of thing that Aelith is very passionate about, which is the performing arts. So we're going to have an hour on working in the performing arts during pandemic with some Aelith members and some non-Aelith members as well. So please do join us over the next 2 Thursdays. And once again, a huge thank you to Adam and to Mike for being with us this evening.
Thank you.
Good evening.